Hey guys, it's Jason here with Mastermind. Of course, most of you know me as a guitar player, but I also like to dabble in some other instruments as well. Bass guitar is one of them. So we wanted to come on here and make a video for you guitar players who want to learn how to properly play bass guitar. And since I'm not a professional bass player, we're going to have Rich Gray, the bassist for Annihilator and Aeon Zen. He's going to share some of the common mistakes that guitar players make when it comes to playing bass. And hang around at the end, you're going to hear his version of the intro to this song that you heard in the beginning. Of course, he's going to do a much better job on bass than what I did.
No pressure then. Cheers, Jason. Thank you for having me on. So the first thing I'd like to discuss is bass tone. Now, I see lots of guitarist bassists that maybe aren't quite as sure what they're doing when it comes to creating bass tones. You might be able to create a killer guitar tone, but to have a bass tone that really supports the guitars and also adds its own thing into the mix and makes everything bigger and heavier, I think that's something that maybe evades quite a lot of guitarist bass players. You can actually get away with quite a lot more distortion than you might think, because lots of people think, oh, guitar's distortion, bass is low end, so you keep it clean so that you can have the low end nice and full, which is a good idea, but there's actually a lot more treble in a bass tone than you might often think. So to get it to really complement and make the guitar sound heavier, I tend to go for, especially for modern metal, like something with quite a lot of distortion, that has a lot of high end. If I'm playing with a pick, that gives it quite a lot of pick attack, and it can just sound huge and make everything sound bigger and punchier and just adds so much and makes it a lot heavier. Now the second thing is playing guitar parts on bass. Now this might be the cliche thing that everyone talks about when they talk about guitarists playing bass, but of course bass doesn't just have to play the exact same thing as the guitar. It can do, and that can be a really cool effect for certain passages, but doing that all the time does not really make you like a fully fledged bass player. So there's different ways of thinking about how to approach parts compared to guitar and compared to bass. Obviously the first thing would be you might not want to play so many chords down low on the bass because it can get a bit muddy. But also things like just varying things up. Maybe you don't want to follow a riff exactly as it is. You might want to change the octave that you're playing certain notes in. So if the guitar's playing sort of higher chords or going up a scale, you might want to go down, especially if you've got a 5-string. It can be really cool to go onto the lower string when the guitar's playing a bit higher, so you're really giving a bigger foundation. And then combined with the bass tone that I talked about a minute ago, you still get some high end coming through even though you're playing really low. So you're filling out the frequency spectrum a lot more than you might think. So thirdly, that I see a lot of guitarists do when they're playing bass is it's kind of an extension of the previous point in playing the guitar parts on bass, but they'll write their bass parts on guitar, which is absolutely fine to do, but you have to keep in mind that it's going to be played on a bass, not a guitar. So of course the scale length on a bass, if you check out this one behind me, for example, that is a lot longer than a guitar neck, which means the frets are spaced a lot further apart. So this can create problems. Say if you're playing, I don't know, like an E minor arpeggio or something. So on the guitar, you might do that on the open string, the open E, 3rd fret, 7th fret, and then the octave above that on the 7th fret maybe. But for example, if you try to play that on bass, depending on the tempo, of course, and depending on the articulations, it can be a lot tougher because you've got to stretch from the 3rd fret to the 7th fret, which is fine on guitar. That's not really much of a problem, is it? But if you try and do that on bass with the longer scale length, the bigger gap between the frets, that can really, really push you to stretch a lot further. And also, if you're trying to play that lots and lots of times, it can start to hurt, and it makes sort of enduring throughout a whole performance a lot more challenging. So you might want to think about shifting which string your notes are on. So as I was saying, if you're playing an E minor arpeggio, so open string, 3rd fret, 7th fret, which is what, the G and the B, you might want to then play the B note on the 2nd fret of the A string, the string above, rather than playing it on the 7th fret of the E string, just to make it a bit more comfortable to play on bass. It will probably sound a bit clearer as well because you're not having to make that stretch, and it's easier to press the fret down in a way that will give you a super clear note. The other thing, the next one I want to talk about, is guitarists only playing root notes because they sort of go too far in, well, maybe the bass isn't going to do what the guitar would do. And then they simplify it so much that it's just like not really doing anything. It's just chugging along on the root notes. So the guitar's moving around chords, maybe it's got some intricate notes here and there, and the bass is just playing the root note of absolutely everything. It's not particularly interesting to listen to. It's not massively fun to play either, because that's another part of it. You know, you want to enjoy what you're playing on the bass. So just trying to spice it up. You don't have to copy the guitars, obviously, like I was saying, but at the same time, you can come up with interesting parts that maybe weave around the guitar parts that isn't just having you play the root notes. And of course, even if you do just play the root notes, you can do things like switch it up by playing different octaves. You can go between different octaves, add in passing notes between chords, all that sort of thing, just to make it a bit more fluid, give it a bit more movement, and it will give your song a lot more life as well. And the last thing I'd like to talk about is guitarists always playing with a pick. Now, this is, again, probably another super obvious one that guitarists do a lot when they're switching onto bass, because they already know the technique of playing with a pick. They do it on guitar all the time. But there's a lot more to it than that. You can play metal bass with a pick. I do it all the time. It sounds fantastic. Once you get that pick attack and mixed again with the bass tone that I discussed earlier, it's like you can get super heavy, punchy tones that fit really well into a mix. But at the same time, it's maybe not always as dynamic. So if you have a song that, say, it's got a heavy intro, a big riff that you want to play with a pick at the beginning, that's cool. That will sound great. Then, say, for example, it drops down in the verse to something a bit lighter. Maybe the guitar drops out to something clean, and you're still playing with a pick. You still have that sort of pick attack, that harsh hit on the beginning of every single note, whereas you might not want that. So what I often do in the middle of a song is switch between playing with a pick and playing fingerstyle, which, depending on obviously how hard you hit the string with your finger, you can get a lot of attack out of fingerstyle playing, but you might not want that. So in this instance, I'll be playing a lot softer with my finger, which gives a rounder sound. You have less attack at the beginning of your notes, which gives it a softer sound, and it can fit well into sort of adding variations and giving your song more dynamics and just letting it breathe. So having said all of that, I'm now going to go and play bass over the riff that Jason showed you at the beginning of the video and show you how I might interpret it using the ideas that we've just talked about.
It's such an honor to have Rich Gray to be part of Metal Mastermind and do this video for you guys. I hope you got some value out of it. Rich actually has a complete bass guitar course called Metal Bass Master on metalmastermind.com. We'll have a link in the description of this video so you can learn more about the course and what he has to offer you through that course. I'm actually going through the course myself because I love playing bass and I want to get better at it. So do check that out, Metal Bass Master at metalmastermind.com. Again, there's a link in the description of this video. Guys, we'll see you on the next video. As always, create your own sound.